The phone lights up before you even open your eyes. A few messages, a missed call, a bright little storm of reminders that today is supposed to be your day. Somewhere in another room, somebody is already thinking about what to write to you, what to post, what cake to buy, what face you are expected to wear when the first congratulations arrive. And for a brief second, before your feet touch the floor, your chest becomes heavy. Not because something terrible happened, because nothing terrible happened, because the day has not even started yet, and you are already tired of it. You look at the date and feel not joy, but pressure. Not gratitude, but tension. Not celebration, but a strange inner tightening, as if the world is about to place a spotlight on a part of you that you have been trying not to look at too closely. Most people explain this in a very easy way. They say some people just do not like attention. Some are shy, some are awkward, some are ungrateful, some are too serious, some forgot how to have fun. But that explanation is too shallow for what actually happens inside a person who does not love their own birthday. Because very often this is not about being cold. It is not about being strange. It is not about having no heart for celebration. It is about what this day touches. It is about how one date can press on identity, memory, self-worth, emotional debt, loneliness, aging, social performance, and old pain all at once. A birthday is never just a date. For some people, it becomes an X-ray, a forced mirror, a day when the distance between who you are, who you were, and who you thought you would become suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. And if that feels painfully familiar, leave a like, subscribe, and stay with me. Because by the end of this video, you may stop seeing this as a harmless quirk and start seeing it for what it often really is. A deep psychological pattern with a real cost, a real history, and a meaning most people never notice. The first hidden trait is this: borrowed attention. There are people who enjoy attention because it feels like warmth, and there are people for whom attention feels like exposure. Not affection, not connection, but exposure. Psychology has long shown that the same social focus that nourishes one person can overwhelm another, especially when attention feels less like being seen and more like being inspected. For someone with a highly sensitive inner world, a birthday can feel less like love arriving and more like the walls opening. Think about the familiar scene. Messages start coming in. People ask where you are going, what the plan is, why you sound tired, why you are not more excited. They sing, they joke, they tag you, they remember you publicly. And something in you wants to disappear. Not because you hate people, because you hate becoming an object in their field of vision. On an ordinary day, you can choose how much of yourself to reveal. You can stay quiet, stay useful, stay hidden inside routine. But on your birthday, your existence becomes the topic. You become the center. And for some people, that is not flattering. It is suffocating. Many of them grew up learning that visibility was dangerous. Maybe attention in childhood came with criticism. Maybe praise was followed by comparison. Maybe being noticed meant having to perform, explain, smile, or become somebody easier to handle. So now, when the whole world turns its head toward them for one day, their nervous system does not read it as celebration. It reads it as risk. From the outside, this can look rude, cold, unappreciative. But often it is not a rejection of love. It is a defense against overstimulation. The tragedy is that the more people insist on making the person feel special, the more trapped that person feels. Because what others call warmth, they experience as pressure with balloons attached to it. And that is the first painful truth. Sometimes the person who withdraws on their birthday is not rejecting connection. They are trying to survive the weight of being visible. Not all attention feels like love. To some people, attention feels like losing control of their own boundaries. And once you understand that, the next pattern becomes harder to ignore. Time as accusation. A birthday is supposed to measure life in a cheerful way. Another year, another candle, another step forward. But for some people, the day does not feel like a marker of life. It feels like evidence. Evidence that time moved. evidence that something did not happen, evidence that they are no longer as young as they were when they still believed certain dreams were just delayed, not threatened. There is a quiet psychological pain in birthdays that has almost nothing to do with vanity. It is the pain of self-comparison across time. Not comparison with other people, but comparison with the version of yourself who once imagined a very different future. You wake up, and suddenly the date starts asking questions you did not agree to answer. Where are you now? What have you become? What did you build? What did you lose? Who is still here? Who is not? What did you promise yourself 1 year ago that still lies untouched somewhere in the back of your mind? That is why some birthdays feel heavier than others. Because they do not just add a year, they expose a gap. You see, people say age is just a number. But for many people, age is not a number. It is a confrontation. It is the calendar turning into a witness. And if you carry unresolved grief, regret, stalled ambitions, or a life that looks nothing like what you once imagined, a birthday can feel less like celebration and more like a silent courtroom. Again, people on the outside reduce it. They say everybody gets older, relax, be grateful, enjoy the day. But gratitude does not cancel psychological dissonance. If your inner timeline is full of unfinished chapters, this date can hit like a spotlight on the ruins of abandoned expectations. Not because you failed in some simple way, but because you are human enough to feel the ache of time moving faster than healing, faster than clarity, faster than reinvention. And this is where the shame gets especially cruel. Because the person is not only hurting, they are often ashamed of hurting over something the world insists should be joyful. So they smile, answer messages, maybe even go out. But inside, the day keeps whispering the same thing. Look at the distance between your age and your life. That is why birthdays can become emotionally dangerous for people who already carry a harsh inner judge. The date itself becomes part of the prosecution. A birthday stops being light when time no longer feels like growth, but like testimony. And once time starts accusing you, memory is never far behind. Memory ambush. Some people do not dislike birthdays because of the present day. They dislike them because birthdays are memory traps. A smell, a song, the shape of a cake, a certain kind of forced cheerfulness, a relative calling with the same voice they had years ago. Suddenly the day is not today anymore. It is every birthday that came before it, stacked invisibly inside the room. This is how emotional memory works. The mind does not store experience like a clean archive. It stores it in associations, sensations, unfinished meanings, which means one date can reopen feelings you thought were buried. Maybe your birthdays were lonely when you were young. Maybe they were forgotten. Maybe they were chaotic. Maybe adults around you were fighting. Maybe the day was never really about you, but about managing other people. Maybe you learned very early that even on the day that was supposed to feel warm, disappointment could still arrive right on time. So now, years later, you say you just do not care for birthdays. But your body may remember more than your words admit. That is the strange cruelty of these days. People think they are inviting you into a harmless ritual. They do not see that the ritual itself may be wired to old sadness. Not obvious trauma all the time. Sometimes something quieter. Repeated emotional letdown. A long history of small disappointments. The kind that never look dramatic from the outside, but quietly teach a child not to hope too much. This creates a very specific adult. One who lowers expectations before the day begins. One who says, do not make a big deal out of it. One who avoids plans, laughs it off, shrugs, minimizes, disappears. It looks detached, but often it is preemptive self-protection. If you do not expect warmth, it cannot fail you. If you treat the day as meaningless, it cannot hurt when it feels empty. If you say you hate birthdays first, then nobody gets to discover how much some part of you still wanted it to feel different this time. That is the devastating paradox. Sometimes the person who claims not to care is not the person with the smallest emotional need. It is the person who learned that needing is dangerous. A birthday can become unbearable when it no longer feels like one day, but like every unfinished wound returning in costume. And from there, the next mechanism becomes almost inevitable. Performance exhaustion. There is a special kind of fatigue that appears when you are expected to feel something on command. Not do something, feel something. Be happy, be grateful, be lively, be touched, be social, be open, be fun, be available, be easy to celebrate. For many people, this demand is invisible because they comply with it automatically. But for others, birthdays expose how exhausting emotional performance has become. You know the script. Reply warmly. Smile in the photo. Act surprised. Receive affection correctly. Do not make anybody uncomfortable with your discomfort. Do not let your sadness ruin the atmosphere. Do not be difficult on your own special day, and that is exactly the point. The day that is supposed to be about you often becomes another day of emotional labor for other people. You are not only having feelings, you are managing how your feelings affect everyone else. If you have spent years being the stable one, the polite one, the emotionally careful one, the person who knows how to keep the room comfortable, then your birthday can feel like another shift at a job nobody notices you are working. Even celebration becomes responsibility. You start wondering whether the people calling are checking in because they care, or because the date reminded them to perform closeness. You worry about how much enthusiasm you owe. You overthink every reply. You feel guilty for being tired, then guilty for feeling guilty, then even more tired because now you are performing gratitude on top of emptiness. From the outside, this is easily misunderstood. People say, why make it so deep? Just enjoy. Just let people love you. But letting people love you is easy only when love feels safe, unconditional, and undemanding. When love arrives with expectation attached, when it requires mood, availability, and theatre, it stops feeling like comfort. It starts feeling like a stage with no exit. And that is why some people crave one impossible birthday gift more than anything else. Not attention, not presents, not noise. Permission to feel exactly what they actually feel. The person who dreads their birthday is often not emotionally numb, they are emotionally overworked. What looks like coldness is sometimes just the collapse that follows too much inner acting. And beneath that collapse, another deeper wound often waits. The worthiness audit. A birthday has a brutal way of turning affection into a measurement. Who remembered? Who forgot? Who wrote more than 2 words? Who reached out late? Who did not call? Who used to care and does not anymore? Who only appeared because the platform reminded them? For someone already struggling with self-worth, this day becomes a trap of social accounting. It is not childish. It is not petty. It is what happens when the human need for significance collides with public ritual. A birthday does not just ask whether people know you exist. It asks whether your existence still moves them enough to act. So a person who already lives with hidden doubts can spend the whole day reading emotional meaning into every silence. They tell themselves they do not care, but they notice everything. The missed message, the short reply, the person they hoped would remember, the absence that confirms an old fear they never stopped carrying. Maybe I matter less than I pretend. Maybe I am easier to ignore than I thought. Maybe people only keep me around in ordinary time, but on a day that is supposed to prove something, the truth slips out. This can sound dramatic until you understand how identity works. Our sense of self is not built in isolation. It is shaped through reflection, through response, through the feeling that our presence lands somewhere in other people. So when a symbolic day amplifies that question, even small things can hit with surprising force. And yet here is the reversal most people miss. The person who gets wounded by birthdays is often not obsessed with being adored. Often they have simply lived too long with emotional scarcity, which means they do not need grand gestures. They just need enough consistency to quiet an old uncertainty. When that consistency does not arrive, the day becomes a referendum on their value. This is why birthdays can leave some people feeling strangely humiliated, even when nothing obviously bad happened. No catastrophe, no fight, no disaster. just a sequence of tiny emotional data points that add up to one unbearable conclusion. I am not held as deeply as I hoped. That hurts because birthdays do not merely measure popularity. They awaken the more ancient question underneath. Am I worth showing up for? A person can survive many hard truths, but when a date turns their worth into something that feels countable, even ordinary silence can sound like rejection. And then comes perhaps the quietest pattern of all, the fear of being fully seen. There are people who hate their birthday for a reason they can barely explain. They do not just fear attention or aging or disappointment. They fear the closeness that the day tries to force. Because a birthday is intimate in a very specific way. It makes people speak directly to your existence. It asks them to acknowledge that you were born, that you are here, that you matter, that your life means something enough to mark it publicly. And if you have a complicated relationship with yourself, that kind of acknowledgement can feel unbearable. Not because it is false, because it goes too deep. When you have spent years living in self-criticism, emotional distance, or quiet self-rejection, warmth can feel almost invasive. A kind message can hit the same place a harsh one hits, because both demand contact with the self you try not to stand too close to. You hear somebody say they are glad you exist, and instead of relief, something in you recoils. Why? Because part of you does not know how to receive that without conflict. This is where hidden identity pain enters the picture. Some people do not dislike birthdays because they dislike life. They dislike birthdays because the day touches the precise fracture between their outer functioning and their inner belonging. They can work, talk, joke, help, survive. But being deeply welcomed into existence is a different matter, a harder one. It asks for self-acceptance they do not quite have. So they avoid the day, shrink it, minimize it, make fun of it, act too cool for it, say it is childish, say it is pointless, say it is just another day. And maybe part of that is true. But another part is this. If they let the day become meaningful, it would force them to confront how difficult it is for them to believe they deserve tenderness without earning it first. That is why the discomfort can feel almost spiritual, not religious, existential. It is not only about a party, it is about whether your life feels welcome to you. And that may be the deepest rupture of all. The person who cannot receive their birthday may not be rejecting joy. They may be struggling to believe their own existence can be held without condition. So if you have listened this far and felt yourself inside these patterns, then maybe what you dislike is not really your birthday. Maybe you dislike what the day reveals. It reveals how attention lands in your nervous system. It reveals what time says to your unfinished self. It reveals what memory still has access to. It reveals how tired you are of performing emotion for other people. It reveals how quickly your worth begins to feel measurable. It reveals how difficult it still is to stand in front of your own existence and let it mean something gentle. That is why this has never been a simple personality quirk. It is a psychological portrait. A person who does not love their birthday is often carrying a highly specific inner architecture. Sensitivity without safety, need without permission, memory without closure, presence without ease, self-awareness without softness, longing without trust. And yes, there is a cost to living this way. The cost is that even love can feel heavy. The cost is that celebration can trigger grief. The cost is that ordinary rituals can become emotional examinations you never asked to take. But there is another truth here, and it matters. This does not automatically mean you are broken. Sometimes it means your mind learned to protect you in places where other people learned to relax. Sometimes it means you adapted to disappointment by becoming careful with hope. Sometimes it means your inner world is not shallow enough to treat symbolic days as empty theatre. And sometimes it means that beneath all the tension, there is still a part of you that wanted this day to feel safe, true, and warm, but got tired of being hurt by wanting that. So no, the person who hates their birthday is not always dramatic, ungrateful, or cold. Sometimes they are one of the most psychologically burdened people in the room. The kind who feels too much, remembers too much, questions too much, and has learned to hide all of it under a quiet sentence. I just do not like birthdays. But now you know that sentence can hold an entire life inside it. And maybe that changes something. Maybe it changes how you judge yourself when the date approaches and the weight returns. Maybe it changes how you look at somebody who withdraws on the day everyone expects them to shine. Maybe it changes the story from